are going to get started again. I am here with Sara Yood, who is the Deputy General Counsel for Jewelers Vigilance Committee, also known as JVC. And I just have to do a quick plug for Sara and for JVC. First of all, Sara, every time we ask you for help, you help us. And I know it's not because you don't have other things to do.
I have so many other things to do.
But you always jump in.
Yes.
And that's also the plug for JVC. The JVC is the organization that helps the American jewelry community navigate complexity. Because there's so much complexity in the work we do. So it's a building filled with lawyers who could be making a lot more money elsewhere.
So much more money.
So much more money. They have incredible degrees from incredible places. They are incredible thinkers, and yet they do this work for us. So if you're not a JVC member, they could use your membership, because then we end up asking for their help all the time, and they come help us. So today we are going to be talking about Russian sanctions, or sanctions in general. There's a number of things to talk about sanctions. But I think that there's this very specific initial interest within this community about what's going on in terms of getting materials in to the United States in gold and diamonds that are then used to fund the conflict in Ukraine. So let's start there. Where are we with sanctions now, and what's happening?
Sure. So I'll travel back in time together to February 23rd, 2022. That was the day before Russia invaded Ukraine. And on February 23rd, 2022, we had the Kimberley process, and we had, sanctions in other places. We didn't really have a ton of specific sanctions for Russia. Although there were some after the Crimea invasion from I think it was 2014. But there wasn't a ton of focus on this area in the industry. And in fact, I think the industry really viewed Alrosa, the Russian diamond mining corporation, as a good partner in the industry. The people who work at Alrosa were trying to do better, I think, for the mining practices that they had. They participated in RJC. They were doing good work. When Russia invaded Ukraine, February 24th of 2022, I think everybody woke up that morning and thought, this is bad. The U.S. was already prepared for this, right? Obviously we had been talking about this possibility for a long time. The U.S. government was already prepared, and on February 24th, the day of the invasion, they released a sanctions package that contemplated diamonds, right? So it put restrictions on Alrosa's ability to raise money. It put restrictions on the CEO of Alrosa. Why Alrosa? Why diamonds? We know that the money that Alrosa raises from the diamond mining goes to fund things like the war in Ukraine. How do we know this? Well, first of all, let's think about what Alrosa itself is. Alrosa, the corporation, is 1/3 owned by the government of Russia. It's 1/3 owned by the state where the diamonds are mined, and it's 1/3 publicly traded. So the money that is raised for mining these diamonds goes back into the government's coffers to be able to be used for funding whatever it is they want to do, including invading a neighboring country. So this package of sanctions was ready to go on February 24th.
For weeks, if you recall, the United States was saying, don't do it, don't do it. We know you're thinking about doing it, don't do it. So it shouldn't be surprising to us that there was that preparation.
Right. And also one of the other ways that we do know that Alrosa, the money from Alrosa funds the military and conflict in Russia is because there's a submarine named the Alrosa. So, it's pretty obvious. It's easy. I think it's really easy to look at that and to laugh and to think oh my God, well, yeah, duh, we all should have been thinking about this before this happened. But I think if you take a step back, it's it becomes more relevant to think about, okay, how are we thinking about all of the countries where we source from? What is the likelihood that, that they're going to invade another country and try to take over? These are global conversations and global concerns and questions and issues that are becoming very, very real. And I am lucky to have been in this industry for 11 years, but that means that I wasn't around for the original issue of conflict diamonds coming to a head in the industry. It was not part of my everyday consciousness. And when Russia did invade, I would wake up every morning and read the news and think about how closely tied it was to my job. And that was, for me, that was the first time that was happening in my career in the jewelry industry, to think about how the top headline for 8 straight months was about my job. And it felt really personal for a lot of different reasons, which I think we'll talk about. But so that first package happened. That first package of sanctions happened February 24th. And then in March of 22, the Biden-Harris administration issued an executive order directly banning the import of Russian diamonds, fish products, and alcohol. So basically it was an executive order that was trying to target things that are high up in the public consciousness of these are things that come from Russia, right? So vodka and caviar and diamonds. But the executive order, said it's direct import of rough or polished. We all know that most of those diamonds that are mined in Russia go somewhere else to get cut and polished. And those diamonds that are cut and polished somewhere else are considered substantially transformed under customs guidance, and now they are a product of another country. So if most of those diamonds are going to India to be cut and polished, they're now a product of India, and now they are legal to bring into the U.S.
And I think the statistic is that 95% of diamonds in the world are cut and polished in India.
Yeah, and so it was interesting the way that the trade press talked about this. They talked about this being a loophole, and I think that took on sort of greater significance than it maybe should have, because this is just the pathway of goods into our industry. This is just the way diamonds move, and. So, and customs rulings about substantial transformation, that concept isn't going to change because it applies across products.
So many.
It is not just about diamonds or gemstones or gold or anything like that. It's about every product that comes into the United States. And there are significant tariff implications as to why that's not going to change. So because there are different tariff rates for different countries and making things in one place versus another, to change substantial transformation would fundamentally overhaul everything in all consumer goods, basically, and all products that are manufactured anywhere in the world. All of their tariffs would change, all of the work that people have done to set up factories in certain countries because of benefits, the entire system would be completely screwed up. So that is why substantial transformation isn't going to be the way to change this, to deal with this issue.
Well, and just to add a piece to what you were saying, because I know a lot of people spoke out at the time, well, this is substantial transformation thing is the problem. Well, it's not. And it's complex in the same way that mining is complex. So if people say, let's just all stop mining gold, no more gold. Well, look how many people would be hurt if they couldn't mine gold. Substantial transformations has benefits and some downsides depending on the situation. So, and we're not the only country that uses that. Every country uses that.
Right. So then in April of last year, they finally put Alrosa fully on the OFAC specially designated nationals list. So that's the list of all of the people and businesses around the world that we can't do business with if we are in the United States. And whether that's because they are, Vladimir Putin, or they are a drug cartel runner, or, something else, that's the list that you have to be checking every single time you do an international transaction. And because if you don't, and your business Cartier and you mistakenly send a piece to someone in Hong Kong who's on that list, you will be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that did happen in, I think it was 2017. So it is a real issue. The OFAC SDN list is sort of just this like indicator, and you can go to it right now. You can take out your phone and just Google OFAC, OFAC, and then SDN. There's like a searchable thing. You're welcome to put in my name. I've searched my name about 10,000 times on the OFAC
you think
SDN
that's
list.
making me flag
Yeah,
you for
it's
some
they
reason?
definitely think I'm a terrorist. No, it's just I use it as like when I show people how to do this. I'm like, here, look at me. I'm not on the list. But if you type in Vladimir Putin, here he is. So, but it's like, it's something that if you're not already familiar with it, you should get familiar. So April last year, fine, great. They're fully on the list. They closed down their U.S. office, and because they literally could not do business in the United States any longer. And I think some people thought, cool, we did it. Obviously, we didn't do it. And there still are. Certainly, there are Russian goods that are still coming into the country through India. We know this to be the case, and we know also that the U.S. government has now been working on dealing with this for the last 18 months, trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to create a system or get people on board with making sure that we can figure out a way to not bring these diamonds into the U.S. So what's been happening since then is this sort of like high-level governmental conversation with industry and then amongst themselves. So one of the issues that the U.S. was dealing with pretty early on was that they really felt like we can't do this alone. If it's just the U.S. saying, okay, we're going to stop these diamonds from coming into the country, there's still going to be markets for them elsewhere. And so for a while, the work was diplomatic work to bring other people on board. So that meant that folks at the State Department were constantly meeting with colleagues, in the EU and in the UK and in Australia and in other places where they're like, how can we build a coalition so that we're not just cutting off ourselves, screwing our own industry, right? Because the jewelry industry, as often as we say it's small, it's also big, right? Because if you think about just how much of the GDP of New York City is the diamond district, it's a lot. And so we don't want to cut off our own industry in the wrong way and not be able to, have this industry and have these products and continue the work that we are doing, but also we want to make sure that we're not creating markets elsewhere for this. So that is why the last couple of statements that you've seen about this have come from the G7. So it's the G7 countries that are working together to figure out, okay, how are we all together going to cut off this market, this flow of money for Russian goods? And so, and for a long time at the G7 level, the impediment was Belgium. In particular, it was Antwerp. So Antwerp thought, I think there's this traditional, it's a rivalry, I don't know, like this conflict between Antwerp and Dubai in terms of being the center of diamond trading. And we all know that Dubai is winning right now because they have fewer impediments to trade. I think folks in Antwerp were really concerned that we're going to lose goods, we're going to continue to lose market share if we cut off this route. And so for a long time, they were preventing their government from building onto this coalition or just from getting involved because they were like, look, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. And that was months and months and months. And then suddenly something changed. And I think they realized that the tide was going in one direction and they were going in another direction. And they finally said, okay, we're going to get on board. So now Belgium is on board, which means the full EU is on board, which means the G7 is on board. And now what is happening is that everybody's trying to figure out how.
And I think it's interesting because after you and I talked last week, the headlines have just been coming out in the last week about how our China policy is just not in jewelry, but overall China policy, because it hasn't been coalition building the way this effort has been, is creating imbalance in trade that's ultimately going to leave us isolated. Our normal trading partners are working around us. So this kind of coalition building work that Sarah's describing is actually very good for the jewelry industry. Unfortunately, we have, decades of saying it's too hard to see where diamonds come from. And so it's taking 18 months and not the, weeks that we would have, we were not prepared when the invasion first started because of all these decades of resistance.
And it's decades of resistance because of the way that the diamonds are fundamentally aggregated, right? Because the value for so long wasn't in knowing country of origin. The value was this diamond looks like this diamond and I can match them as a pair. Or this diamond looks like these 300 diamonds and I can put them in a packet, And it's not, and that's not the same thing as like, okay, where did each individual diamond come from and where was it mined and then that kind of thing. And that's why, when you do see that in other projects, it's so incredible to see because, for so long we haven't been able to do that. It's not lost on me that that everybody is currently working towards a solution that is a problem for white people. And we haven't, and this is like that this has been an issue in Africa for generations, and it's just now that we are all finally figuring out how to do this. But I also think that from the government perspective, I know that people I talk to at state are like, I want to see this through because this is the thing I've been working for so long. This is the thing that we have been asking the industry to do for so long. And I got to make sure this happens because we finally have a chance at doing this.
And it's a unique moment, isn't it? What happened that caused industry and state and treasury to start working so much better together this time?
So I think it's a couple of things. One is that, on the industry side, when the invasion first happened, there was a really immediate response from the American jewelry industry that we didn't want to be part of this. There were multiple retail stores who immediately, said, okay, how do I talk to my suppliers and tell them that I don't want to buy any Russian diamonds? And then on the supplier side, I had suppliers coming to me saying, hey, Sara, my retailers are coming to me with this information and I don't exactly know how to explain to them that I can't tell them this. Can you help me figure out how to say that? And also, can you help me with talking to our suppliers in India and telling them, hey, this is something that's important to us. Do you think you could work on it? We're constantly having those conversations. I think because the response of the industry was so immediately recognized how we don't want our money going to fund this conflict, that the government was willing to look at that and say, okay, the industry is trying, but they are being hampered by the same structures that we've been hampered with for so long. And so let's figure out how to help them. I also think that we just currently happen to have, a person at the State Department who's been in and out of the industry for a while who really cares about this issue and is willing to talk to us in a way that people at state haven't been for a very long time. JVC has had these relationships with state for quite a while, but I think there are folks at state now who have relationships across the industry that are just much more productive than they used to be. The back and forth dialogue is much more robust and much more inclusive. It used to be pretty closed off and a little bit terrifying, honestly. Yep. Sometimes the people from state would come and talk to us and they would just be like, we're going to tell you what to do and we're not going to listen to any of your problems. But then, at the JVC luncheon this year in March, the ambassador level person came to talk to us because he thought it was important. And he said, I want to come and address, everybody who's coming to this event because I think it's important to show your industry that I am listening to what you have to say. So I think we should talk about what it is they're trying to do. We've been talking a lot about, So from everything that we've talked about and is being discussed at the G7 level, it seems pretty clear that what they're actually going to do is that starting January 1, they're going to require that any diamond that's 1 carat or higher has to show some kind of provenance information that it was not mined in Russia. And that over the course of the year, they will lower that threshold, maybe getting down to 0.7 and then to 0.5 and then maybe even to 0.2 at some point, but probably not anything lower than that because they know it's going to be literally impossible to do anything smaller than that. But that's sort of, where they're headed. How you're going to be able to prove that is currently an open question. There's a number of different industry groups that are working on addressing that are working on sort of like aggregating a list of like, okay, if you do this thing, then, that'll count, or if you do this thing, then that'll count, and how are we going to sort of like harmonize and unify all of that? It's not totally clear yet, but we're working on it.
Which is the right way to start a metric, by the way. You set the goal, and then you figure out how to measure it. So the goal is profoundly impactful.
And it's, I think it's important to acknowledge that, 1 carat isn't terrifying, but it's also not the best, right? Like it's good because that's a level of diamond that is often already being graded. So you may already have some kind of report or information about it, and so people are also willing to spend the money to find out more information about a 1 carat diamond. You're not always interested in doing that for something smaller, and also many of the goods that are coming out of the mines in Russia are smaller.
Right.
So, is this truly addressing the problem?
It's a lot of Melly.
Maybe eventually, but it's a start, and I think this 1 carat threshold, this line exists because that is what the industry said to state when they came to us and said we want to figure out how do we do this in a way that's not going to completely screw everything up. You start somewhere, right? And that's what we say that all the time in responsible sourcing, in anti-money laundering. You have to start somewhere. You have to start with one thing, and then you build and you build and you build. And that's what Anna basically said this morning, right? She started somewhere, and then you build on that, and you continue to iterate, and you continue to improve and add things on that are important to you as you learn them. So I think that starting at 1 carat is, I think it's a start. It's somewhere to go.
Now, this G7 initiative agreement, will it require another executive order or another sanction, or will it fall within the existing executive order?
Great question. I'm not sure yet. So the G7 doesn't have any legal enforcement authority or any way to issue a thing. So every entity involved is going to have to do their own country, either issue their own country's regulations or do something internally to make this happen. There's no legal structure for the G7. So I think that there's probably a way to build a regulation onto the current executive order, but again, I'm not an executive order expert. So I don't know exactly how else they might do it. So probably built on that, but I think because of the high level of the conversations, if they needed another one to get this done, they could get that.
Could do it. So who's the industry that's in these conversations? I know you guys are crucial to it.
Yeah. So it's us. It's other trade associations as well. It is partially the U.S. Jewelry Council, which is an organization of U.S. trade associations that works together to speak to the government on behalf of the industry. It is also anybody who has an existing relationship with the State Department. It is folks who are currently sitting in this room have been part of those conversations. And then on the industry side, it's the Antwerp World Diamond Center, who's been working a lot with the Belgian government. And also, like, there was a point during all of these conversations where the U.S. was kind of leading all of this, and then they sort of were like, okay, Belgium, it's your turn. Like, we're gonna sit back and let you work that out over there. And so it's been this like push and pull between those two countries. It's been a lot of work, but then it's also talking to Indian delegations. So the Gems and Jewelry Export Promotion Council from India has been sending delegations along with their own like ministers and, of mining and, or their the people who are in charge of the government cutting centers and bourses and things like that are also like involved in these conversations, because truly the Indian industry is the one who's going to have to do a lot of the work of segregation.
And GJEC, I know, is very concerned about that, about how to pull that off. And I think it's fair to say there are people there that are concerned about doing it too.
Sure.
They're not resistant. It's going to be hard to do.
I think it's true, and I think it's important to remember that India's relationship with the U.S. is strong, but its relationship with Russia is also strong because Russia supplies a lot of the military equipment that India uses, and and other things, and so they're in this very difficult negotiating position where they know that this business, which is a huge part of their economy, relies on American sales, and so they want to figure out how can we preserve our own position in this and make sure that we can still supply everything, and that cutting and polishing accounts for a ton of the jobs, and especially in Surat, and so how do we make sure we preserve those livelihoods?
Yeah. And it's easy to demonize India, and we've heard a lot of that as well. But you know what? India has a very complicated colonialized past, and they have strong reasons to not want to be dominated by Western business interests. So they're watching their own backs, and that's what every country does.
I mean, so much of this is about colonialism.
It is.
If you go backwards. But I think it's also interesting to do a little bit of a thought exercise about like why does the U.S. do this, right? Why do we use our position to force other people into doing things like this? And part of it is because our financial economy sustains so much globally, and we have a lot of power. But also, I think we see this as it's personal. It is for many of the people in the industry. For me, it's personal because I'm descended from Eastern European Jews who were kicked out of Russia, just a couple generations ago. And to me, when I look at this, I see Putin trying to recreate a system that excluded me and excluded my family, and that said that we weren't good enough to be part of it. And so it can feel really like, okay, I am, do I want to live there? I don't. I'm good here. But but it does feel like, okay, they are invading a country that they thought was weak, and that part of that might be because the president was Jewish. And so, how do we look at that structure and think, okay, we're going to be okay with this? We can't be okay with this. And so the U.S. has an opportunity to use a bit of a bully pulpit, which it's always been great at, but to say like, okay, we're going to take this opportunity to change the whole industry, not just Russia and diamonds.
Well, and all industries are moving in the direction of transparency. So when we started the gold campaign, right when the invasion happened, within days, and a lot of people in this room were in on that effort, but we did get called on it. Why now? There have been problems in the past, and it's like, you know what? This is a moment when, kind of like why the State Department started taking the jewelry industry seriously. It was a moment when everybody viscerally engaged with the problem. So if that gets us to material transparency, let's ride it. You know, it's a wave we can ride. So now we're on the cusp of not actually knowing how to know where all of our diamonds come from, but having a will to figure out how, and that's the way the world is going for all goods. And so the jewelry industry cannot afford to not take this opportunity to figure it out. Food's figuring it out, apparel's figured it out. You know where every part in a piece of medical or automotive equipment came from. The jewelry industry simply can't be behind that.
It's really, I think it's easy to say, like, if I can go to Target and scan a QR code on a banana and they'll tell me where it's from, you know, I should, in theory, be able to do that with a diamond. It's so much harder to do that when you know how diamonds end up getting here, right? But I think that it's a very similar, you know, question with gold, and I think that, you know, the State Department is also focused on that. In June they released this like 40-page African gold advisory, which, like, I admit to you, I'm halfway through it, and I really tried to finish reading it before this conference, and I just couldn't do it. And I am a lawyer; it is my job to read things. But it's, you know, it's like you read this document, and it's like, okay, so you see Russia's influence in that document too, right? Because it's the Wagner Group, you know, who's been, you know, exploiting the gold trade in Sudan and in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and, you know, they are enriching themselves, and they're this mercenary group that is vaguely now, you know, it was tied to the Russian government, and then they tried to maybe coup Putin, and then now who knows where they are or what they're doing or what is going on. Again, like, talk about waking up every day and thinking like, oh my God, my job is the top headline. That happened again when the Wagner Group was maybe doing a coup. And I literally like woke up every day thinking, I don't know. Okay, well, I should probably have some coffee, and then try to figure this out, because like that's the group that is exploiting the gold trade in sub-Saharan Africa, and is, you know, so like there again, the money is all going back to fund God knows what, you know, and I think that the reality of our industry, we all feel this so deeply because it's the products that we're working in and it's the stories that we're telling, but the reality is that these are also our stories, even if we don't want them to be. So how do we engage with that? How do we deal with that? How do we put structures in place to try to move beyond that? While also, again, remembering not to stop trying to benefit the people in sub-Saharan Africa who rely on the gold trade. And that's, I have to say, like, the advisory is really written with that in mind. It says like up top and then multiple times, at least halfway through, and I'll tell you about the last half when I read it. But they say like, we don't want this advisory to discourage people from investing in the gold trade in sub-Saharan Africa, which many people rely on for daily sustenance. And, you know, I think we can see that from, you know, the presentations we've already had today, that it is very much relied on, and we don't want to cut that off just for lack of formalization.
Yep. Do you feel like the gold is better covered by the sanctions at this point than the diamonds, or do you think it's just as porous?
I think gold is harder.
You do?
Yeah. Because you can remelt it and re-refine it over and over and over again. I think it's a lot easier to disguise the source, and that's scarier to me, actually, than diamonds are.
So when you and I talking about sanctions, we agreed that we were not going to try to make it easy for you, because it's very messy. You know, you hear some of our own conflicts, you know, like, why weren't we talking about sanctions that happened in Africa? Why did we just start when it was, you know, a big deal in Ukraine? Is it, you know, are we paying attention equally to needs around the world? Or are we just falling into the trap of caring when people look like us? I mean, this is the messiness of sanctions. Sometimes sanctions are a very good thing. Sometimes they're not. And so we didn't want to sit up here talking about sanctions and make it sound like we think sanctions are the be-all, end-all of how to solve world problems.
No, and in fact, the U.S. government has been trying to unwind their sanctions in Afghanistan for quite a bit, because they had a whole bunch of sanctions that were on the Taliban, and now the Taliban is the legitimate government in Afghanistan, and they know that people in the country need to make money, and they have gemstones, and so they've been slowly rolling back those sanctions over the last year and a half, to the point where, at least as of a conversation that I had last week, I think there might be a road to trading with, Afghan gem traders sometime in the future. Which is not a thing that I could have said 6 months ago. And so I think, they know that anything that they do is necessarily it has to be heavy-handed because that's the mechanism. But I will say that at least at the government level, there are a lot of people thinking about okay, when do we decide to roll these things back and how do we do that? I don't think our relationship with Russia is ever going back to what it used to be. And I am not sure we will ever be sourcing directly from a Russian diamond mine again. At least maybe not in my lifetime. And I'm pretty certain that I will never go there. I think adding to that is the fact that apparently our talk today has been blocked in Russia.
And our African Union demonstration yesterday, because we're streaming it to a private group, and it was blocked. It popped up, this has now been blocked in Russia. So, yeah.
So it's hard for me to contemplate the U.S. relationship going back. And so when I say that we're doing all of these things and we're going to fundamentally change the structure of how we source diamonds, I don't think that's temporary work. I think that's permanent work, and I think it has to be because it's something that people in this room have been asking for so long. But I also know that, at least I hope that there is, some kind of pathway back to some kind of, relationship. But I think it's going to be a very, very long time until we get there.
Yeah. Should we do questions? Yeah. So, questions. Betta, do you have a microphone
so
back
many.
there? Okay, Brandy, because I know you can yell. You go first while we wait for a microphone to get up here.
Okay. First, a quick plug. ABC is the most important organization in our industry right now. They are the connections to the State Department. We need them, and they're secure.
I have a question.
Thank you, board member Brandy Dallow. Yeah, I know.
Sorry, I have a question
Wait,
from
hold on.
online, but before I couldn't.
Okay.
Okay, let me know if I can take this. Okay.
What percentage of diamonds are actually being used to fund this war? Is this the most important sanction?
So Brandy's question is, do we have any sense of what percentage of diamonds are being used to fund the war? Do we have a sense of the impact?
I can't tell you the percentage, but I do think that oil and gas are a much larger funder for the Russian government.
Several people. So.
Diamonds are a part of that. They're not the most important part.
And then just the second question is, who you haven't mentioned is the mining companies that are not De Beers, Sara, et cetera. Are they involved in these conversations? Could you tell us a little bit?
Yep. So for anybody who didn't hear, the question was about the diamond mining companies who are not in Russia, and are they involved in these conversations? And yes, they are definitely involved in these conversations. And they're involved both in conversations with the U.S. government and then also with their own governments as well.
Okay, Betta, did you have a question from the virtual audience?
Yeah, we have two questions. So the first one is there momentum within the U.S. government and perhaps G7 to actually require some traceability information on country of origin beyond not from Russia? Is there anything the collective we can do to support this?
Great question. I think we'll know a little bit more later on this year when we have more conversations within the industry and with the government about how they're actually going to enforce this. In terms of provenance information, I think there's going to be multiple ways to end up proving it. And I think it's not going to just be not from Russia. But again, we're not entirely certain what it fully looks like yet.
I have another question, if that's okay.
Let's do one of the audience ones, then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. I'm Abby. I am going to ask from a layman's point of view. In front of you is a woman in Bocha, Marange. The community woman who is going to ask you. In Zimbabwe, we have a model town called Zimplats, where platinum is mined. Platinum goes to South Africa. In that town, there is a standard of living that is set because Zimplats has to meet certain standard imposed by South Africa main company. There is roads, there is good schools, there is water running in the tapes. Social justice is practically met. That's in Zimbabwe. And on the that's in the western part of the country. Then in the east, there is Marange, where diamond, which I believe would create more revenue than what platinum is doing. I don't know the technicalities, but I have no access to clean water. I have no access to a hospital, no access to the basics you can ever imagine of, not even to put a plate on the table for the family, but tons, carats and carats of diamonds are being shipped every day. I even see the Hoover helicopter going up and down with the diamonds. And the question is, some 2-3 years back, up to 2022, US says they are going to impose sanctions on the Zimbabwean diamond because of unmet human rights that are happening in Zimbabwe. Look, I'm not advocating for sanctions for my country, but it's the way it is, right? Why can't we have a situation where you take the simplest stance to say, if there are no roads, if there's no water for the people, if there's no the basics, we are not going to buy the diamonds. Because the diamonds are going to Antwerp. From Antwerp, they are going to EU. They are finding their way to America. The same diamonds with tears on them from the people. Why are they trading freely? What does it take for you, as the big brother, to fight for the cause for the Zimbabwe? Yeah? I'm not calling for sanctions for Zimbabwe, but I'm just throwing a layman's question. If you go to the women in Marange, they will tell you that karat rega rinotogadzira road. 1 carat rinogadzira road, they can get us a road to go to the hospital for labor. But we can't get there. I'm sorry, Zimbabwe's case is very emotional. It is that bad. In the city, there is no road. You cannot drive a car. I have a car back home, but you can't drive the car. There is no road. I don't know.
Abby, thank you. With my JVC hat on, I will say that you have asked this question there's no great answer for it, but I am not the government. And that is something that people, because of the work that JVC does, I think people think that we are a lot of the time and that we have a lot of power to I can't decide who gets sanctions and who doesn't, and who gets to abide by, gets to put in standards in places and who doesn't. With my Sara Yood, a person hat on, I agree with you. I don't think we should be buying those diamonds, and I wouldn't do it. But I think that this is an incredible example of the true cost of this conflict. The true cost of diamonds is a community that doesn't have roads, or the cost of the system that we have right now. And so that's why I think we are trying to change.
Well, those are the costs of opacity. So the work, Abby, ideally, theoretically, the work that's being done now to agree that we need to be able to see the source of a diamond will allow us to see that a diamond came from Russia. It will also allow us to see that a diamond came from Zimbabwe. And that work will allow us then to be more human with our purchases. But until now, until we get to the point where we can say these diamonds came from here, other than the Melly, which I think we all agree is going to continue to be a problem, everybody just says it's too hard to know. And when it's too hard to know, hands get thrown up and we don't make progress. But I would think that if we can figure out whether or not they came from Russia, we can also figure out where they came from, right?
I think what we're saying is it used to be too hard to know, and now the cost of not knowing is too high.
It's too hard. Yeah. Another question from the audience?
Yeah.
I mean,
w-
virtual.
yeah. I would like to know the potential role of Dubai in this geopolitics.
Oh boy. They have a potential, they have a huge role. They have Dubai, the trading center, has an enormous percentage of the world's diamonds are going through Dubai. They have an incredible ability to say that this is also important to them. They are not, the UAE is not part of the G7. So they are not part of this particular group that is trying to do something. But I don't think anybody in the G7 would be upset if other countries also did this, right? Like, I think that is, in fact, why the G7 is working together, so that they can encourage everybody else to join this market that is going to be more traceable.
Well, and you mentioned when we were talking that Antwerp is now, rather than resisting the move toward transparency, has recognized, oh, we could use this as a point of differentiation.
Yep. So they've seen, okay, well, if we can show that every diamond entering the EU, which is then going to Antwerp, can prove this, can prove that they are not, originating in Russia. That's a differentiation point, and maybe then people will come back to Antwerp to buy more diamonds.
It's an economic motivator, but it works.
Yes, no, thank you so much. Really informative, Sarah. Two questions and maybe a comment. One is with reference to your point about colonialism, and the narrative is very well taken. But wouldn't you say that actually Putin has been using that narrative exactly and saying that the others are the colonialists? And also even on the Semitic, anti-Semitic issue, he has been also playing that card on the other end, saying that the Ukrainians had the Azov Brigade and so on. And then he has had also, strong ties with Israel. So I'm wondering, what's the Israeli dimension in this, and how can this be cultivated in a more appropriate way? And then the other point is, I serve on the Independent Governance Committee for the Dubai Multi-Commodity Center, and I was at the expo in Dubai when Israel was invited. There are diplomatic relations between the UAE and Israel, and this is a very important part of that relationship. In fact, and the Israeli exhibit I visited, and I've been to Israel also a few times. So, there is this very intriguing access, which I wonder how this can be played in a more constructive way, especially with the diaspora community like yourself.
Thank you for that question. That is maybe the most complicated question I've ever been asked on a personal and professional level. So I think that, yes, I believe that Putin has been using a shield of saying of anti-Semitism as in criticism of Ukraine, I also, God, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. Okay, so I also don't think it's anti-Semitic to criticize the government of Israel. And but also, I am an American Jew, and I say that from a place of great privilege. And with this internal conflict of love for a country that provided a home for my people and deep despair over the fact that it is marginalizing an entire other group of people. And so the position of Israel in the industry, I think, is a naturally complicated one. And I think that I'm so glad to hear that you're involved with Dubai, because that makes me feel better about it. And I do think that there's this. There is also an old world, new world, competition thing happening between these two between Antwerp and Dubai, that is fascinating from an academic perspective, and also really interesting from a okay, so let's see if the G7 can get together to do this, how will everybody else react to it? And I don't know. We're gonna have to see.
That was a big part of Sarah's and my conversation. We're both liberal Jews who wish that in the jewelry industry we could have conversations about Israel without it turning into a discussion about anti-Semitism, because these are issues that need to be discussed, but they're very complicated and people are very passionate, and very few of us really understand all the geopolitics or appreciate all the histories. So it's a messy topic that we should prepare ourselves to discuss. There was another piece to the question, which was, Salim, you asked about Russia using the anti-colonial argument. China is doing the same thing. So both China and Russia are building very strong bases throughout Africa, arguing about, how they're the answer to the colonial past while colonizing at the same time. So everybody wants to colonize Africa and blame everybody else for it.
So I appreciate, Sarah, where you're coming from. I like professionally what you said and also personally what you said. And I like the personal level. I like the level of what the industry response is and everything. But on a personal level for me, and I very much tried to stay out of this discussion politically, because my politics are that borders shouldn't exist, period, anywhere. But my father, I'm a first-generation American. My father was not Jewish, but he spent time in a concentration camp and escaped. Lifelong pacifist, he was. I am too. And you said something very interesting at the beginning, that the U.S. government had sanctions package ready to go, that they knew this was coming. And my answer to that is, if they had that ready to go, why isn't it a full sanctions package? Why are we buying uranium from Russia? Why is any of this other stuff? As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to war of any kind, and I'm against the next war, as well as the ones that are going on today.
Martin, that's probably a topic we just don't have the time or the capacity to
Well, the
dig
question
into.
is, no, the question is serious. It's like, if you're committed to sanctions, then you take sanctions, and sanctions will stop war. Sanctions of both sides completely, and they will stop.
Sanctions are an imperfect tool that need to be wielded with finesse, and they can sometimes be as damaging as they are beneficial. But you're talking about, you're getting into uranium and oil and gas, and it's really just not an area we're prepared to dig into, because the expertise is sitting on the stage
this
to
is the
talk
big
about the rest
picture
of
question. Otherwise,
it
it
is
is always close.
No, but I can actually. I mean, I don't have an answer for you. I agree. Like they put limits on this, and part of why they put limits on this is because there's lots of countries that rely on Russian oil and gas and other commodities that they produce. I happen to have a friend who is a high up sanctions compliance focused lawyer at a drug company, and this is like in the same way that this has been my life for the last year and a half, this has also been his life for the last year and a half, because he's working to make sure that people can still access life-saving drugs. And so like it's so fascinating to me that somebody in an industry that I feel like is completely unrelated to what I do is dealing with the same issues that I am. And so I don't have an answer for you as to why the government has chosen to do it this way, why they have stopped at certain places. But I do know that there are other industries that are grappling with us the same way that we are.
I think we're going to have to wrap up. We've got other sessions that we need to get to today. But please continue the conversation amongst yourselves, and let's keep asking these questions, and let's accept that these are really, really messy issues. But there's one really cool thing. Have I said really enough? Really? Okay, there's one extremely cool thing that is happening in all of this, and that is there is finally some will to understand the provenance of diamonds. And that's positive. Okay, well, thank you, Sara.
Thank you, as always.